Ruth Mercer knew something was wrong when the first ranch hand they passed took off his hat and called her husband Mr. Mercer. Silas did not correct him. He touched 2 fingers to his brim and kept the wagon moving toward carved stone gateposts Ruth had never seen before. She looked at the gateposts. Then at Silas. "You told me your place was up this road." "It is. You did not mention gates. They keep cattle where they belong. These are not cattle gates." Silas kept his eyes on the road. Less than a day earlier, Ruth had married him outside Leadville after the Mountain House Hotel closed and left her without wages or lodging. For 8 weeks, Silas had eaten supper there whenever cattle business brought him to town. He wore the same brown coat and spoke like a man accustomed to earning every dollar. When he offered marriage, he promised a roof and honest work. Ruth had believed him. Now, fenced meadows stretched farther than she could see. 3 riders passed. Every man touched his hat. "Morning, Mr. Mercer." Silas nodded. Ruth folded her hands over her traveling bag. "How much land do you have?" "A fair amount." "How much is a fair amount?" He glanced at her. "Enough that the answer may irritate you." "It already does." The trees opened. Ruth stopped speaking. Cedar Crown stood above the valley, built from pale gray stone with long verandas and tall windows. Below it stretched barns, worker cottages, corrals, and a glass-roofed building joined to the house by a covered passage. A woman in a dark dress waited on the steps. Ruth looked at the estate, then at Silas. Dust covered his boots. One sleeve still carried the tear she had noticed 3 days earlier. He looked exactly like the cowboy she had married. Only the poverty had been false. "Stop the wagon." Silas pulled up. Ruth climbed down before he could offer his hand. "How much of this is yours?" "All of it." "The house?" "Yes." "The barns?" "Yes." "The cottages?" "Yes." She looked back at Cedar Crown. Silas stepped down. "I should have told you. That would have been useful before the wedding." "I know." She turned toward him. "No, you know now. Yesterday you apparently did not." His face tightened, but he did not argue. The woman approached. She was perhaps 40, straight-backed, neatly dressed, with household keys at her waist. "Silas, Eleanor." Her gaze moved to Ruth. "So this is Mrs. Mercer." Silas heard the pause. "My wife, Ruth. My sister, Eleanor Mercer." Eleanor gave a small nod. "Your room is prepared." I had the blue suite opened. Ruth looked at the mansion. "I will not need it." Silas spoke first. "Ruth, I need somewhere to sit. After that, I need to know when a wagon goes back toward town." Eleanor's fingers settled over her keys. "You have been married 1 day. Not even that long." Silas removed his hat. "Eleanor, leave us." Inside, Cedar Crown was worse. Polished floors, carved banisters, thick rugs, paintings in gilded frames, a hall clock that probably cost more than Ruth had earned in 2 years. She stood in the west sitting room without removing her coat. Silas remained near the door. "Say it." Ruth looked at him. "Why?" "I wanted you to know me before you knew Cedar Crown. You decided what I was allowed to know." "Yes, that is not the same thing." No, his refusal to defend himself made her angrier. She noticed a chair sitting crooked against the rug and straightened it before sitting. "I spent 12 years making beds for people with more money than sense," she said. "I carried coal upstairs while I slept beside a kitchen stove because I could not afford boarding." "I know. You know some of it." "Yes, and yesterday I believed I was marrying a working cowboy with a small ranch. I am a working cowboy." She gave him a hard look. "You are also this." "Yes." Ruth stood. "I leave tomorrow." Silas nodded. "If that is what you want, I will take you." No argument. That unsettled her more than persuasion would have. She walked out. The covered passage beyond the kitchen led toward the glass-roofed building she had noticed from the drive. Its outer door was locked. Through dusty panes she saw sheet-covered tables and a tiled room beyond them. Warm mist clouded one corner of the glass. Silas had followed at a distance. What is this? The old guest wing. Why is it warm? Spring comes out of the hill under it. A warm spring? Warm enough for bathing. She tried the handle again. You have an empty guest house beside a stage road with bathing water and you keep it locked? My mother closed it 11 years ago. Why? That answer belongs partly to Eleanor. Ruth looked through the glass. 6 doors lined a corridor. Beyond them were shelves, a serving hatch, and a kitchen. Her hotel-trained eye began counting. Rooms, meals, laundry, travelers, money that could be earned instead of handed to her. Give me the key. Silas studied her. The key. He went inside. When he returned, Eleanor was with him. She removed one long brass key from her ring. This wing is not part of the household. Good, Ruth said. She took the key. Silas watched her fit it into the lock. The door resisted, swollen by years of weather. Ruth put her shoulder against it. It opened with a scrape across the stone floor. Warm mineral air touched her face. Dust lay thick across the tables. A sheet had slipped from one chair. Ruth stepped inside, then looked back at Silas. 90 days. For what? I stay 90 days. I reopen this place. I take no allowance from you. I earn a share from every room and meal. At the end, I decide whether I stay married to you or leave with money I earned myself. Eleanor stared at her. Silas looked into the abandoned wing. And if it fails, then I leave knowing it failed because of my work, not because I was too poor to choose. Silas held her gaze. All right. Ruth closed her hand around the brass key. Then, today is day 1. By sunrise, Ruth had turned the abandoned guest wing into a battlefield of dust, broken hinges, warped shutters, and decisions. She tied an apron over her dress, opened every window that would still move, and started with an inventory. 12 beds. 8 usable mattresses. 23 chairs, though only 14 stood straight. 2 iron ranges. 1 cracked wash basin. 3 cupboards of dishes wrapped in old newspaper. Enough linen to serve a hotel twice the size, provided mice had not reached the lower shelves. Eleanor stood in the doorway while Ruth wrote everything down. You intend to use the Mercer household linen? No. That answer seemed to surprise her. Ruth pointed toward the shelves. I intend to use what belongs to this wing. Some of it has not been touched in 11 years. Then it has rested long enough. Eleanor looked at the notebook. You will need soap, lamp oil, flour, coffee, salt, lamp chimneys, firewood, and probably new ticking. I know. And money. I know that too. Eleanor folded her hands. What exactly do you expect Silas to provide? Ruth closed the notebook. Only what we agreed. Repairs that protect his building. Everything else gets written against the guest operation. Eleanor studied her longer this time. Then she nodded once. That is clearer than I expected. So am I. Eleanor almost smiled. Almost. Ruth spent the morning separating what could be cleaned from what had to be replaced. She found 3 old guest registers in a drawer, but did not bother reading the names. They were not useful yet. What mattered was whether the roof leaked. It did. Only in 2 rooms, but enough to stain the plaster. She marked both with chalk. The kitchen pump worked after 20 hard strokes. The spring room needed scrubbing more than repair. The water itself still ran warm across pale tile and disappeared through an old stone channel. By noon, Ruth had a list. By 2, she had cut it in half. Silas found her carrying broken chair legs into the courtyard. You discarded $12 of work. I saved you 30. How? Half these chairs only need new joints. You know furniture repair? I know what hotel owners refuse to replace. He took 1 chair from the pile and tested the seat. You are keeping this one? Yes, it leans. So do most men after supper. We still feed them. The corner of his mouth moved. Ruth noticed. She pretended not to. She asked for 2 carpenters. Silas gave her 1. Why 1? Because the north fence lost 6 posts last night. You have more men. I do. And ranch work does not stop because my wife opened a hotel. Ruth disliked the answer. She respected it more. Fine, 1 carpenter, and me before breakfast. She looked up. You? I can handle a hammer. I have seen you handle reins. Tomorrow you can judge the rest. At dawn, Ruth entered the guest wing expecting silence. Instead, she heard a saw. Silas stood in the first sleeping room with his coat over the bed frame, and both sleeves rolled exactly twice. A rotten window frame lay on the floor. He had already fitted half the replacement. Ruth stopped in the doorway. You started without me. You marked this one urgent. I did. The wind came through it. I noticed. He bent back to the work. She watched him measure the wood twice before cutting. No audience. No foreman. No attempt to impress her. Just work. You could have sent someone. Yes, but you did not. No. Why? Silas fitted the board into place. Because I said I would help before breakfast. Ruth had no answer ready for that. She disliked not having answers ready. So she picked up the second window frame. Move over. They worked until Eleanor rang the breakfast bell. 3 mornings followed that way. Ruth cleaned, counted, ordered, bargained, and trained 2 ranch women who wanted extra paid work after their regular duties. Silas repaired shutters, patched roof boards, and rebuilt a narrow porch step. Eleanor controlled the main household as tightly as ever. When Ruth asked for 12 unused silver serving trays from a storage closet, Eleanor refused. They belong to the house. They are gathering dust. They belong to the house. Ruth stared at her. Then she walked away. That afternoon, she bought plain tin serving trays from a supplier in town. Silas saw them unloaded. You could have used the silver. No, Eleanor stopped you? Yes, I can speak to her. No, Silas looked at Ruth. She stacked the trays herself. If I need you to win every argument, then this is not my business. He did not mention it again. That evening, Ruth discovered he had eaten supper alone in the guest kitchen instead of at the long dining table. He sat on an overturned flour barrel with a plate balanced on one knee. She came in carrying invoices. What are you doing here? Eating. There is a dining room. So I have heard. You own it. So Eleanor reminds me. Ruth put the invoices down. There is stew left. I know. She poured herself a bowl. They ate at the scarred work table without servants. For the first time since the wedding, the house around them did not feel large. 3 weeks passed. The guest wing changed. Fresh curtains replaced rotten ones. The mineral room smelled of soap instead of damp stone. Mattresses aired in the sun. A painted board near the stage road announced rooms, meals, warm baths, and stable space. Ruth set prices low enough for ranch families and traveling salesmen, high enough to cover provisions. Then she asked Silas for the current cost of flour, beef, lamp oil, and firewood. He brought her the ranch expense figures, not secret papers, not accounts she had hunted for, numbers she needed to price supper. Ruth studied them. Then studied them again. Silas. He looked up from the broken hinge in his hand. These feed costs are high. They were worse last winter. And cattle sales? Down how far? Far enough. Ruth turned another page. Repairs to the main house had been postponed. 2 wagons had not been replaced. A line showed money from Silas's personal investments moving into payroll. She looked at him. You sold something. Rail shares. To pay wages? Yes, you could have dismissed men. Yes, but you did not. They have families. Ruth looked through the open kitchen window. Across the yard, children chased one another near the worker cottages. For the first time, Cedar Crown's size looked different, not simply wealthy. Responsible, heavy. How long can you keep doing that? Silas set down the hinge. Not forever. Ruth looked toward the guest rooms. Something in her plan shifted. This had begun as 90 days to earn her own freedom. Now other people's winter might depend on whether those rooms stayed occupied. The first travelers arrived 2 days early. A broken stage axle forced 9 passengers to seek shelter before sunset. Ruth had prepared 6 rooms. By dark, every bed was filled. 2 men slept on cots near the spring room. The kitchen served 21 suppers. Eleanor quietly sent over extra bread, without being asked. Near midnight, Ruth stood in the courtyard while steam fogged the glass roof and voices drifted from every room she had opened. Silas came beside her. You were right. About what? This place was worth opening. Ruth looked toward the worker cottages beyond the barns. No. She closed her hand around the brass key at her waist. We were both wrong. Silas waited. Ruth looked at the filled windows. This place is not just my way out anymore. And for the first time, she understood Cedar Crown might need her to stay. By the 6th week, travelers had stopped arriving at Cedar Crown by accident. They came asking for Ruth. Stage drivers passed the name along. Ranch wives sent cousins. A salesman from Denver returned with 2 other men, because, as he told Silas, your wife serves supper hot and doesn't charge me for looking tired. Ruth heard him from the kitchen. She charged him extra for pie. The guest wing began paying its own bills. Then it began paying Ruth. Every Saturday evening, she counted her agreed share at the small office desk, entered it in a plain account book, and placed the money in a locked cash box. Silas never asked how much was inside. That mattered. By mid-October, frost silvered the courtyard before breakfast. One morning, Ruth found 8 guests standing in the corridor holding plates. The little dining area had run out of chairs. Beyond the connecting passage sat an unused Mercer sitting room large enough for several tables. Ruth found Eleanor at the breakfast table. I want the west sitting room. No, it has been closed since I arrived. It is part of the private house. I need it for meals. Eleanor set down her cup. That room contains family portraits, my mother's piano, and my grandfather's desk. I am not asking to burn it. You are asking to fill it with strangers. Yes, Eleanor's fingers closed around her keys. No, Silas entered through the side door and looked between them. Ruth picked up her notebook. I'll change the plan. Silas frowned. You need that room? I could use it. Then. No, Ruth stopped him. I said this business would stand without you settling every disagreement for me. It is my house. And that is exactly why you cannot solve this one. She returned to the guest wing. That afternoon, Ruth moved 2 tables into the spring room and hung canvas screens between the eating area and the bath entrance. It was awkward. It worked. At dusk, Eleanor appeared carrying the west room key. The portraits stay. They stay. The piano is not used as a serving table. It will not be. My grandfather's desk remains locked. Agreed. Eleanor held the key a moment longer. You could have asked Silas to order me. Yes, you didn't. No. The key dropped into Ruth's palm. Then perhaps you understand this house better than I thought. The first supper in the west room served 31 people. Eleanor ate at the far end. 3 days later, she corrected Ruth's arrangement of the napkins. Ruth left them exactly as Eleanor changed them. Silas noticed. He wisely said nothing. The colder the nights became, the busier Cedar Crown grew. Ruth's cash box became heavy enough that she moved it with both hands. One evening she worked the figures 3 times. She could rent the old boarding house beside the freight depot in Pueblo. She had seen its advertisement in a newspaper left by a guest. The deposit would take less than half her savings. The rest would buy beds, kitchen supplies, and provisions. She could leave. Not someday. Now, Silas found the newspaper beside her account book. You thinking of Pueblo? I am thinking of what 90 days means. You should. Ruth looked at him. That is all you have to say? What would you prefer? I don't know. He sat across from her. Finally, Ruth asked, Why did you really hide this place from me? I told you. You told me you wanted me to know you first. That is half an answer. Silas rubbed his thumb along a scar in the tabletop. My name changes people. How? They stop disagreeing. They laugh before I finish a joke. They tell me every horse I buy is fine. And women? His gaze met hers. Some liked Cedar Crown before they liked me. Ruth closed the account book. So you tested me. Yes, without telling me. Yes, that was unfair. Yes, you keep agreeing. I ran out of excuses. Water moved beneath the springhouse floor. Ruth looked at the man who had hidden his fortune, then spent weeks fixing windows before sunrise, and never once touched the money she earned. You could have trusted me. I know that now. No. You could have trusted me then. Silas lowered his eyes. You're right. For once he did not reach for a defense. On the 78th day, Ruth wrote to Pueblo asking whether the boarding house remained available. The reply arrived 4 days later. It did. Silas read the letter only because Ruth handed it to him. He gave it back. Want me to take your trunk down from storage? The question struck harder than an argument. You would help me pack? If you decide to go. You could ask me to stay. I will. When? When staying can't be mistaken for owing me. 2 nights before the deadline, Silas carried Ruth's empty trunk into her room. He set it near the bed. No speech, no bargaining. Then he left. Ruth packed slowly. 2 dresses, work aprons, her account book, a tin box containing her earnings. On the 89th evening, Eleanor appeared at the door. Her gaze fell to the trunk. So it is tomorrow. Yes, have you decided? No, Eleanor touched the keys at her waist. You improved the West Room. That sounds painful for you to admit. It is. Ruth smiled. After Eleanor left, Ruth carried the guest wing account book downstairs. Silas stood in the courtyard checking the wagon harness beneath a lantern. The wagon was ready. Her wagon. Ruth placed the closed account book on the office desk. She counted the money one final time and slipped enough to begin another life into her travel purse. Then she walked outside. Silas looked up. At sunrise, Ruth said. He waited. I'll give you my decision at sunrise. Silas nodded once. Neither moved toward the other. Above them, frost began whitening the courtyard stones. There were less than 10 hours left in the 90 days. Ruth woke before the kitchen fires were lit. For a few seconds, she did not know what had pulled her from sleep. Then, she saw the trunk. Her dress for travel hung over the chair. Her coat lay folded beside it. On the washstand sat the purse containing enough money to rent the boarding house in Pueblo and keep herself fed while she filled its rooms. 90 days ago, she had not owned enough to make that choice. Now she did. Ruth dressed without calling anyone. When she opened her bedroom door, the house was quiet. A lamp burned downstairs. Silas stood in the front hall wearing his work coat. Her trunk had already been carried down. You did that? Yes, you could have left it upstairs. You said sunrise. Through the front windows, the eastern sky had begun turning gray. Ruth followed him outside. The wagon waited in the courtyard. Her trunk was tied behind the seat. 2 horses stood harnessed, steam rising from their backs in the cold. Silas held out a folded packet. What is this? Your final share. Ruth opened it. Inside was money and a single page showing the guest wing's earnings through the previous evening. She checked the amount. It was exact. No extra? No, you could afford extra. That would make it harder to know why you stayed. Ruth looked at him. You assume I am staying? No, his answer came quickly. I hope you are. That was different. She put the money into her purse. What happens to the guest wing if I leave? You choose. Ruth frowned. Silas continued. You can keep your share of the business and hire someone here to manage it. You can sell your interest back to me at the value we agreed. Or you can close it and take the equipment you bought. You would let me run part of Cedar Crown from Pueblo? If that is what you want, and if it becomes more profitable, then your share becomes more profitable. Ruth watched his face. There was no trap hidden behind the answer, no clever condition, no reminder that he had given her shelter when she had nowhere else to go. Silas put both hands into his coat pockets. I want you here. Ruth remained still. I want you at breakfast. I want to hear you telling suppliers their prices are foolish. I want your shoes outside the guest kitchen because you forgot where you left them. I want to come in from the north pasture and find you angry because somebody moved one of your chairs. That happened once. 4 times. She almost smiled. Silas looked toward the wagon. But wanting you here is my problem. It cannot become your debt. The first light reached the upper windows of Cedar Crown. Ruth looked at the mansion. When she had first seen it, every stone had felt like proof that Silas possessed more power than she could ever match. Now she saw the repaired guest wing windows, the kitchen chimney, the side courtyard where travelers had eaten when there were too many for the dining room, the west sitting room curtains Eleanor had finally allowed to be opened. None of those things had existed 90 days ago. Not in that form. Ruth turned back to Silas. If I stay, who decides what my place is here? He answered without hesitation. You do. She waited. Silas added, provided I get the same right beside you. Ruth looked down at her gloved hands. Poverty had made many decisions for her. It had decided which rooms she slept in, which jobs she accepted, which meals she skipped. Even marriage had begun because the Mountain House Hotel closed and she had been 1 week away from having nowhere respectable to sleep. But poverty had no vote this morning. That frightened her more than necessity ever had. Because now, the answer belonged entirely to her. Silas stepped toward the wagon. I should get you on the road before the stage traffic starts. Ruth watched him reach for the reins. Silas, he stopped. She walked toward him, not toward the wagon, toward him. You should untie my trunk. His hand remained on the reins. You sure? No. His face changed slightly. Ruth continued, but I am sure enough to stay and find out. Silas did not move. Ruth reached for his hand. It was rough and cold from harness leather. She closed her fingers around it. I am not staying because of this house. I know. I am not staying because you can afford to make my life easy. I know. And if you ever decide again that hiding something is the best way to test me, I won't. You did not let me finish. I know what happens next. What happens? You leave. Ruth nodded. Good, you are learning. She pulled him away from the wagon. They crossed the courtyard together. The guest wing door opened before they reached it. Eleanor stood there. She was already dressed for the day. In one hand she held a key, not the brass guest wing key Ruth carried, a smaller one. Eleanor held it out. The west dining room. Ruth looked at her. I already have access. To use it during meals. Eleanor placed the key in Ruth's palm. This one means you stop asking me. Ruth looked at the key. Eleanor adjusted one cuff. Breakfast guests are arriving early. A coach driver says he has 12 coming from Denver. That is too many for one cook. I know. Will you help? Eleanor's eyebrows rose. I already have bread rising. Then she walked inside. Silas stared after her. Did Eleanor Mercer just surrender a household key? No, Ruth slipped it into her pocket. She reassigned responsibility. That sounds more like Eleanor. The wagon was unloaded before breakfast. Ruth's trunk returned upstairs, not to the blue suite Eleanor had first prepared. Ruth kept the smaller east bedroom, overlooking the guest courtyard. Silas never suggested otherwise. By noon, 12 Denver travelers had become 17. The dining room filled. The spring room steamed. Someone broke a cup. Someone else complained that the bathwater was too warm. Ruth charged him anyway. Late that afternoon, Silas carried 2 short ladders into the courtyard. Between them lay a freshly painted wooden board. Ruth read the words. Cedar Crown Rooms and Meals. You had this made? I ordered the board. Who painted it? I did. The lettering is crooked. It is not. The R is lower. Silas looked at it. The R is fine. Ruth took one ladder. Hold yours steady. They climbed. Silas lifted one end of the sign. Ruth lifted the other. Together they settled it onto the iron brackets above the spring house entrance. Ruth climbed down first. The brass guest wing key rested against her skirt. Silas moved his ladder beside hers. Behind them, warm light filled the glass windows. Ahead, another stage wagon turned through the Cedar Crown gate. Ruth looked at Silas. Looks like we have work. He picked up both ladders. Yes, Mrs. Mercer. She opened the guest wing door. Then quit standing around, Mrs. Mercer. If you enjoyed watching Ruth and Silas build something they both chose, subscribe and like for more Wild West stories.